Coming up this week in computer hardware, let's discuss the latest with the Meltdown and Spectre patches. And while processor architectures change, Nvidia's 65-inch gaming monitors, HTC VIve Pro, FuzeDrives for Ryzen, and the Ryzen G Series APUs, and is the world's thinnest laptop too thin? All that and more coming up next on TWiCH.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiCH.
Bandwidth for TWiCH is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 449, recorded January 18th, 2018. Meltdown Spectre patch update, people.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Home plays a big role in your life. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. It lets you apply simply and understand the entire mortgage process fully so you can be confident that you're getting the right mortgage for you. Get started at rocketmortgage.com/twitch. And by the Ring Video Doorbell. Stop crime before it happens and make your neighborhood safer with Ring. Go to ring.com/twitch and get up to $150 off of a Ring of Security kit.
Welcome to TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, TWiCH's weekly show that aims to bring you the most useful, most engaging, most delightful, and hopefully this week, not the most fever-addled from the CES show floor version of mobile, portable, desktop, Internet of Things stuff. To be highly technical. I'm Patty Norton, who am still hacking my lungs out from CES, joined by Mr. I got out of CES early before the sickness set in, Shrouts. I guess I forgot to say Ryan at the beginning of that, at PCPro.com. Ryan, are you feeling the...
I have no sickness. I came out fine, yeah. I'm worried because I kept seeing people who were like just yesterday saying, oh, I'm finally coming down with that flu from CES. And now I'm starting to wonder if just because you went to CES doesn't mean every sickness you get subsequently originated at CES. If you have been gone for 4 or 5 days, you could have met somebody else in the meantime that passed that on. But no, I'm doing fine here. It's really cold and it snowed quite a bit, which makes it fun to do donuts in the parking lot. But other than that, I'm great.
Donuts in the parking lot aren't great?
No, they are. No.
Okay.
I just needed to fit that in there somewhere.
It was well fit. The oh my goodness. Well, you're also in a position where you spend most of your CES week in closed booths and nowhere near the show floor, which I think gives you an advantage on not picking up whatever horrible diseases, sicknesses are
true. I was at the show floor exactly twice, both times for 2 different meetings with Intel. But everybody else that I met with, whether it be AMD or Qualcomm or ARM or Nvidia, was always that individual like hotel suites, which makes it exceedingly more complicated to see all these people, but maybe does protect me in that way. So it's probably a pretty good trade-off.
Probably. So you wanted to open up the show this week with something we touched on briefly, but has continued to kind of grow, in the background, certainly in the background at CES, although we got a lot of questions about it. And some of my favorite conversations at CES involve like, well, I don't have to worry about, Meltdown and Spectre. And I'm like, well, actually, everything but the Apple Watch in your wrist that you own in your backpack right now has to worry about Meltdown and Spectre patches. And that was a big admission for Apple to be like, yep, it impacts everything but the watch. Patches are in line. Patches, and we talked about it pretty extensively beforehand. Where basically, Windows, Linux, OS 10, iOS, et cetera, the patches were in place or in the process of being rolled out. What's we saw some early numbers that indicated for at least the last couple generations of processors, the differences in the before and after on the patch would be indetectable, with the suggestion that as you went farther and farther back towards, say, 1995, the more of a performance hit you would see. Nothing we've seen reported anywhere nearly like a 30% before and after. And it's tough, right? Because if you didn't have before benchmarks and Windows automatically applied your update, you're probably going to have difficulties doing a before and after. But what's going on with storage performance?
So the interesting thing that came up, and this was when we were first discovering what this security vulnerability was all about, was our theory that it would affect storage performance the most, because applications that are constantly asking for storage requests or are doing a lot of network transfers are, those user space applications are essentially asking the kernel to do something every time. So you have to do these user space, kernel space switches very frequently. With the revised patches and microcode stuff, this essentially equates to clearing these TLB caches, these page tables more frequently, which should result in lower total performance. So Alan, this was right before we left for CES, actually did a couple of spot checks on some testing, and because there had been a couple of reports came out that saw some performance drops in storage performance testing. So we looked at what we think would be one of the worst case scenarios, 4K random testing. But we looked at it on a SATA SSD, an NVMe SSD, and then an Optane product as well. And if you can't really understand the graphs that you're looking at, the essential takeaway here is that the 960 Evo, the NVMe part, got slower after the patch. However, the Optane drive and the SATA drive got faster after the patch, had lower latency on these particular benchmarks. Right. So if you were a site, an outlet that did testing, and you just said, we're going to test storage, we're going to test a 960 Pro or 960 Evo because it's the fastest thing that they had available to them and it made the most sense, you would see that performance drop. However, by throwing in a SATA drive and something even significantly faster than the 960s, we see the performance gains. Now, do I believe that the patches for Meltdown and Spectre caused this speed increase? I don't. I think there's probably other things that have changed in either Microsoft's inbox driver or other stuff that changes with Redstone 4 from Redstone 3 that may have caused that, and we're kind of seeing a combined effect, if you will. So maybe performance would have been more better on Redstone 4 without this patch than it was with it. So that definitely caused some confusion, and it basically indicated to me that we were a fair distance away from truly understanding what the impact was going to be of a bunch of these things. And that's that's kind of good news for Intel and AMD and all their parties involved, because the assumption has been for a while that things were going to be really bad. However,
I think they may have intentionally. It feels like they intentionally led with the worst case scenario, so that the people who had spent a whole bunch of money in the last couple of years would feel really good about the results they saw, which were negligible.
Well, those initial results. Oh, you're talking about the best case scenario being the negligible performance, and I think you're probably right. Right, they wanted that to be the kind of preceding message to everything else. But if you look at, so even today, for example, Intel released some information on a couple of things. One, these patches have been causing random reboots on some systems, which is bad. Initially reported as a Haswell-Broadwell problem, Intel's now confirmed that the rebooting issue actually affects everything up through Kaby Lake. They're still trying to figure out what specifically is causing that, but they promise to have an update available next week to try to address some of that stuff. So now you're dealing with consumers or enterprise customers that don't want to install these security patches because they need the stability of their system to be at a certain level, and now maybe that's put in question. The performance side, which is if you go back up a little bit to that table, you'll see that Intel basically put out their own testing of what they've been able to find, and that ranges from as low as a 0% impact to as much as an 18% impact. The 0% or close to it, like low single digits, is something that is CPU intensive, like integer testing, floating point testing, LinPack, stream testing. These are very CPU heavy tests that don't leave the user space, right? And they represent some specific workloads. They did a server-side Java. They did an OLTP, which is an online transaction benchmark, basically emulating a brokerage service, and that saw about 3.94% reduction in performance. So, something that you might worry about if you're on the bleeding edge of stuff, but not enough to maybe cause us to run around and with our hair on fire. No, they did FIO testing, which is storage specific testing, looking at 4K random, just like we kind of looked at earlier. and saw interesting results. One is at 100% read, like doing the read testing, there was no performance change, but your CPU utilization went up 22%.
Whoa.
Right, went up 22 points. On the write performance, it actually, your CPU only went up 2%, CPU utilization only went up 2%, but you dropped 18% in maximum performance, right? So it's actually kind of interesting to think about, even if you have a 0% performance drop, like they did on their store, like purely synthetic 100% read performance, they didn't see any performance drop, but a 22% CPU utilization hike is pretty substantial. And it tells us two things. One, it kind of gives you an idea of the importance of the speculative execution progress that was made in CPU design over the last decade. And also, if you're applying these patches, just because you think your workload doesn't see any performance deficit, as your workload on that system increases, again, this is more for data center type enterprise applications, you know, you may have to upgrade that server sooner or supplement that machine sooner than you would have otherwise. So, you know, if you're an IT manager, you have 20 database servers that you have to worry about reads from, and they all happen to, because of other applications that are running, other services that are running on them, you were comfortably running at an 80% CPU utilization most of the time. Applying these patches may put you over that threshold where you start to see some impact. So it's interesting to see another angle to have to monitor and measure and look for across the board there. But, you know, Intel this is the most open they have been about this performance story thus far. It's a change from kind of their initial stance on things. They were very cagey, very closed. A lot of you know, the CEO going out on TV and saying, "Oh, everything's fine here. Everything's going to be fixed in a week. We don't see any potential big performance impacts." And then now they're showing some of this stuff. So is it end of world mentality? Still no. But is it much more important that we watch it? I think it is. For consumers, I still believe that this is a close to a net zero problem, right? For gamers, for consumers that are on a laptop or on their PC doing normal type tasks, is when you get into heavy virtualization, heavy IO intensive application workloads that you may have to start to worry. And that was backed up by I had a couple other links in there. You know, Red Hat posted some of their performance metrics, and they, you know, said they tested in a range as high as 8 to 19%. For, again, online transaction workloads, net perf, you know, those types of things. But it was minimal to single digits for high performance computing and those types of workloads. In full disclosure, Red Hat is a sponsor on the TWiCH network. So, and then Epic Games posted something in their blog about their servers that they have for Fortnite. Basically, that line at the top there is the change in CPU utilization after applying the patch. Right, so you can see they jumped from essentially, you know, 18 to 42% increase there, and that kind of makes sense because essentially all this server is doing is moving data around through a network, which is again one of those worst case scenarios. So there are still a lot of things to look out for, and that will be interesting to discuss, I guess.
Yeah, interesting is a gracious word for it. I mean, I had tweeted out about how, you know, sort of Google, Amazon, blah, 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 have to be freaking out about this. And somebody's like, well, why would Google be freaking out? You know, they helped discover this. And it's like, well, yeah, but even if you help discover and sort of work out the fix for a security problem like this, you still got, I mean, how many millions of servers or how many millions of blades or tens of millions? I mean, I can't, you know, it's probably a staggering number of processors, you know, Intel and AMD processors that Google runs at this point, literally scattered around the world. Even if you're part of the team that discovers this, even if you're in on the ground level and in sort of working on the repairs, you still have to deploy these patches over millions of machines. And then you have to find out how it's impacting you. And, you know, I mean, for Epic, does this mean they're going to have to double the number of machines that they run, you know, at peak times to deliver the same performance? Well, that gets expensive. You know, this is, I don't know. You know, I think this is messy and will continue to evolve whether we want it to or not.
Yeah. One of the last things I want to mention, because I think we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, was are people going to change CPU architectures? Is design going to have to revert 15 years. And I still believe that's not the case. I did have a couple of interesting talks with some high-level guys at Intel and ARM and AMD that just said, they don't imagine there is going to be dramatic shifts in the roadmap, but it's impossible to believe that there won't be some shifts in roadmaps because of it, right? People are now more cognizant. We'll see more additions to things like the process context IDs that many of these fixes center around, that Intel put in and Haswell and then updated in I don't know which one, Skylake maybe. More expansion in that area, I think, is what we'll see in the future. Although, like, I don't think next generation's architectures are going to have time to shift. These have been taped out. These have been finished.
That was one of the funnier questions I got about the AMD processors that were announced at CES. And somebody was like, "Well, are these fixed?" I'm like, no, they just got finished. They were just taped out. They're just going to vendors. I mean, these designs were locked in stone before this was even before this was revealed internally, much less externally. I mean, are we talking about 3 to 5 years before we see any meaningful changes in architecture?
I think that's probably pretty accurate. I think if they were super aggressive, maybe 2. Because these BIOS updates that we're getting, they're updating microcode, which is essentially a software layer between the processor and the rest of the components. Think of it as the only kind of firmware updatable location in the system. Those, going forward, all of those will have that kind of stuff pre-installed, ready to go out of the box. And it'll be interesting to see, will future motherboards have an option to turn off or enable, disable some of these security features in order to improve performance for people that are less concerned about it. I think that's probably a negative in the long run, to risk your security due to anything. But I would also not be surprised if. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if at this point we haven't seen it really exploited in the wild, but part of me keeps thinking, like, boy, all it takes is a little bit of one popular app on ARM platforms, and this could get really interesting really fast. I mean, we've talked about tens of millions of unpatched XP machines or Linux boxes. I mean, this is a vector to exploit. And if people go out of their way to sort of bot together, pardon me, people go out of their way to assemble millions of incredibly low powered chips inside of traffic cameras or security cameras. Imagine what getting this kind of level of low access to unpatched systems. It's going to be catnip for an entire category of nefarious individual on the internet. It'll be interesting to see like where the first big exploit is and who it impacts. I think.
Yep, it's going to be a lot of people. I just think it's going to be less than their fearful initial 24-hour cycle led us to believe.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. The mortgage experience, not keeping up with the times. It was dated, needed a client-focused technological revolution, which is why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. Rocket Mortgage gives you the confidence you need when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. It's simple. Allows you to fully understand all the details and be confident you're getting the right mortgage for you. It's convenient. The trusted partners allow you to share your financial information with Rocket Mortgage at the touch of a button. It's powerful. Whether you're looking to buy your first home or your 10th, Rocket Mortgage is able to perform thousands of calculations in seconds. Based on your income, your assets, and your credit, Rocket Mortgage can analyze all the home loan options for which you qualify and find the one that's just right for you. Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Apply simply, understand fully, mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/Twitch. That's rocketmortgage.com/TWiCH. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030. And we thank Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. Shifting gears, One of Shannon's favorite products at CES 2018, Nvidia's big format gaming display initiative, where they were showing off the 65-inch G-Sync panels. Oh my goodness, HDR enabled, 65-inch 4K, 120 hertz panels with NVIDIA G-Sync, variable refresh rate tech to keep your gameplay smooth, and a built-in NVIDIA Shield TV set-top box. You know, it's not just a 65-inch television. It's a 65-inch television optimized to be extraordinary for gaming and kids. It's got a shield built in. 1000 nit peak luminance, which is a big deal in the world of HDR, although Sony had that smackdown with their technology demo that was running a full HDR compliant 10,000 nits. DCI-P3 color gamuts. It's interesting, but essentially it's like, you know, it's a high quality 4K HDR television that's been optimized for gaming. And it's been interesting to watch. Dell announced a couple of HDR monitors. Lenovo, the new Carbon X1s had the Carbon and the Yoga X1 all had HDR-ish or Dolby Vision compatible monitors. Lenovo announced a couple of new laptops, the Carbon X1 and the Yoga X1, which had Dolby Vision compatible sort of HDR compliant monitors. Although technically they weren't, had enough nits to really hit the HDR spec. But if you're looking for a better Netflix experience on the road, that would be pretty fantastic. This is interesting. Did they have any sort of, I know Asus is going to offer one of these, the PG65. Did anybody talk about what pricing from Asus or Acer or HP would be for one of these monitors? I'm thinking it's going to be expensive.
When we asked them about pricing, their reply was more or less, well, there are 65-inch 4K screens of this capability already. It would be silly for us to be significantly more expensive than that, Okay. So. But keeping in mind that this is not a shipping product until late summer, probably puts that a lot in flux. So whether or not, like, if we look at today's pricing for a 65-inch 4K capable screen, with 120 hertz refresh, versus what that price will be in July or August, will be very different. And whether or not they stick to that, I'm a little torn on this. I fundamentally love the idea. Obviously, this is not something you can just put on your desk that you sit in front of. It doesn't make any sense for that. Even if you wanted to be like this totally immersed gamer, when you go to do web browsing, it might be a little bit unnerving to have PC Perspective or Tech Thing or Twit, full screen in front of you at that size. So this is really aimed at somebody who has like a gaming cave, or somebody who is going to game in front of their TV and has a configuration that really works for that. Because if you look at that picture, that kind of stylized picture at the top, it basically looks like a TV on a desk and you're sitting at the desk, which is just not a feasible way to use this product.
No. It'd be like watching a tennis match standing next to the tennis court. Sounds great until you realize you're going and then getting sniped you're like watching a tennis match with snipers shooting at you. Bad, I guess, would be a highly technical term for it. Unpleasant.
Yep. I also think that this is clearly a response to they wanted to have this in TVs. When we first heard of G-Sync, we were talking about, will we have this in TVs? It's been a long time since G-Sync was released. It doesn't seem like any of the standard TV manufacturers wanted to be involved with it, I guess. And so they went with Acer, Asus, HP, PC-centric companies used to making displays like monitors, not TVs. So now you got a question like, what kind of TV functionality is this going to have? When I asked, like, how many HDMI ports are you going to have? No answer. How many, other connectivity options are you going to have? The OSD is going to be like a monitor OSD still. There's some other kind of oddities with it. Again, we're very early, so I can't say for sure, but the Shield TV integration seem very hacked on. Like there's an HDMI, there's a very short HDMI cable running from the back of the device into the input on the TV, right? Clearly the Shield TV is physically in the device, in the chassis, of the TV, but it's just there's an HDMI output and then an HDMI input into the TV, as opposed to it kind of being routed inside. That could change between now and the summer, but it seemed a little hacked together there. I mean, they even didn't have an internal power supply yet, so it's still pretty early in it. Also, they have some work to do on the backlighting. It has why is blank on this? The term for a subdivided backlight for HDR screens. Local dimming. Alan's sitting here next to me to correct me.
Local dimming.
The problem is when you had an all black screen and you had a mouse cursor go across it, like a tiny mouse cursor, a significant portion of those segments would be illuminated. They'd be brighter, higher brightness than the surrounding section, even where the mouse wasn't, right? So because a mouse cursor is so small relative to those individual sections, it seemed like it might be a problem that somebody's going to have to figure out as well. So I'm still really excited for it. I love the idea of a large format or a big format gaming display. I need them to get this right and not screw it up. Otherwise, I think it'll set the whole idea back too far.
There you have it. I don't think we talked about it too much last week. We mentioned the sort of AMD Ryzen Zen Plus move to 12 nanometer. It's going to remain socket compatible. I want to say the 470 chipset that we know almost nothing about, which hopefully will also be, it will be AM4 compatible. We talked about Intel's new mobile processors with the with the AMD graphics built in. I don't think we really talked about sort of the new G Series processors that were coming from AMD. The Ryzen 5 2400G with Radeon RX Vega graphics, and the Ryzen 3 2200G with Radeon Vega graphics. Basically the Ryzen 3's 4-core 4 threads, the Ryzen 5's 4-core 8 threads. You're not talking about a huge amount of computing power in these, but certainly something that should beat the comparable onboard computing power of an Intel processor at the same price point.
These are just new APUs, right? Which is something that actually I'm glad you put that link in there. Well, I thought that too, but in that link you have, they do call them in the subtitle, new generation of Ryzen CPUs, new Ryzen APUs. And that's the first time I've ever seen AMD use the term APU with regard to this. So now I feel much more vindicated in my use of that term going forward. So I appreciate that. But this is something that I feel like they should have had a long time ago, right? That this would have been immediately following the release of Ryzen. I guess you had to wait for the Vega architecture to kind of to come out on the gaming side. But this fills a huge void for them that they weren't able to address. We've talked about it recently. That you kind of forget when you're an enthusiast that because the Ryzen CPUs didn't have integrated graphics like all the Intel CPUs, that there's a segment of the market they just can't address. People who don't want discrete graphics and are building low-cost systems or business PCs or what have you. And that's like 50% of that market out there. So now with the Ryzen 5 2400G, Ryzen 3 2200G, they'll be able to do that. And you're right, they're not the highest performing parts out there, but they should be pretty good, right? It's 45 to 65 watts. In terms of gaming, graphics, productivity, content creation, like the GPU in this is going to be well ahead of whatever Intel has. If you take away the Kaby Lake G part that doesn't exist in any socketed form factor currently. And AMD should see some benefit to that. And these are launching relatively soon. I think February 12th for all of those. And they're compatible with all the motherboards that have been shipping for a while. Your X370, which is overkill, but your B350 and those types of things will all work with it. Remember, they've had display outputs for a long time, even though there were no Ryzen processors with integrated graphics. So now it all kind of makes sense to us.
They obviously knew it was coming. I remember laughing about that in a conversation. Like, how can they have the HDMI on the motherboard if it doesn't? I'm like, I don't know, man. I didn't design the architecture. Back off. And it's part of the reason I think it's worth mentioning that the GPUs in these are not going to be as powerful as a discrete or any of the sort of the more notable discrete GPUs is because when we looked at the numbers Intel was pushing for their new mobile parts, they're claiming like equal to 10, handily beating like a 1050, a mobile 1050, and a few percentage points ahead of a 1060 for the graphics integrated in the in the chip with those next generation mobile parts, those workstation grade mobile parts. It's going to be interesting to see. And then, did you get any hands-on time with the mobile Ryzen parts at CES?
I have an HP system here actually using the 2500U, and it's actually surprisingly good in terms of its performance.
That's not damning with faint praise. That's actually given some sort of the AMD mobile parts of the past. It's a good thing.
It is. Its performance, the interesting thing with those parts is that AMD has always claimed better single-threaded and multi-threaded performance than competing Intel parts, and obviously better graphics performance. That goes without saying at this point. But in reality, in our testing, the CPU scores were better than the Kaby Lake R refresh parts, right? Which was kind of surprising. The reason, as it turns out, is even though AMD talked about the 2500U and 2700U being 15-watt parts, they don't really stay within that limit. They're using more power than the Kaby Lake refresh systems are using, both in burst and in sustained usage models. So probably the real comparison for these Ryzen mobile parts should be the H series from Intel, the 35-watt solutions as opposed to the 15-watt solutions. So we're trying to get a hold of some platforms here to do some of that comparative testing. It's always difficult as opposed to being able to ask somebody for a processor. We have to ask for a notebook to do these types of things. So it tends to take a little bit longer, and people don't want to part with those systems quite as easily. But it's definitely interesting, right? I think it's a really good part. And it's the first really good aggressive solution they've had for notebooks in a while.
Go AMD. Intel launched the Optane 800P M.2 2280 SSDs with 16 and 120 byte capacities at CES 2018. Essentially a much larger version of the Optane memory modules, which currently have been at 16 and 32 gigabytes, and also capable of operating as a sole boot SSD. So that means they can use them in mobile applications too. Alan says they are under embargo as far as performance goes, but, quote, it's a safe bet that performance will be very close to what we've seen out of the Optane memory, and warranty will be 5 years with an endurance of 200 gigabytes per day. Cost remains unknown, but Alan's guessing it's going to fit in between Optane memory and the 900P, and be interesting to see if they do any larger capacity devices anytime in the near future.
What are your thoughts on that capacity? Sorry, I was going to ask that. How restrictive do you think the peak 120 gig capacity will be?
Pretty restrictive, but I also tend to travel with large amounts of video on a laptop for work, and I like to have music on my laptop. I mean, I've gotten away with 128 gigabytes, but it was problematic for me. I also know that I probably store a lot more data locally than the average human being. So I think for a certain sort of entry level, trying to get the most out of a sort of a 3 series processor, they probably have a tremendous amount of potential. In terms of something where maybe it's not used as the primary boot drive, I think they get a lot more interesting. But if those are going to be sort of, critical for high performance machines, I think they got to get up in the 256, 500 gigabyte range. But again, like I said, I deal with a lot of videos, so I tend to spring to the more storage is always better.
Yep.
Man, Shannon loved the VIve Pro and the VIve wireless adapter. Were you feeling it? Did you get any eyeball time on the new VIve Pro?
I did.
It's like 78% increase in resolution.
Yeah, I did. And they had, so I went to their demo section, and they had a spot where they had the current one and the new one side by side, so you could kind of swap back and forth. And I won't say that it's a night and day difference, but it is clearly better, right? And the section they have you in when you do that has a lot of angled lines. There's some text for you to look at, right? The text is obviously sharper. The screen door effect is minimized pretty dramatically, but it is still there, right? Which I guess I was hoping, I didn't expect it to be gone. Otherwise, they'd make a much bigger deal about this. But I was hoping it would be, almost unnoticeable. But it's still there. But it is greatly reduced. The ergonomics are a little bit better. It's much easier to take on, put off. It's got like a twist style tightening restraint. as opposed to the 2 Velcro straps. It's more like the PSVR, more like some of the Microsoft mixed reality headsets. It's got new speakers or headphones integrated on it, which are much better quality. And it has a new tracking system that it can use too. And then they also announced the wireless adapter, which is not shipping yet, or I think is coming in the summertime, which is partnered with Intel. They're using the 60 gigahertz band on it. It sits up a little bit on the top of your head, like antenna coming out of the top of your head. But the idea that you can be untethered is phenomenal. Obviously, these types of accessories have existed, but not officially from Vive. So they seem to have at least more confidence in this solution than they had previously. No indications actually on battery life. I think Alan said yesterday that based on the wording that he got, that it kind of felt like they were talking about 2 hours worth of use time between charges, which is not a lot. I don't think anybody wants to have an external USB battery pack in their back pocket to charge their wireless charging.
45 minutes.
Yeah. So, and I do think it looked better. Now the game demos that I did, we did a racing simulator, and I guess it's worth noting, like, I didn't notice the screen door effect while I was playing. I didn't notice that it was significantly better than what I would have done before either, because in that one I only got to use the VIve Pro. Sure. And when you're playing a game and you're actually involved and distracted by the steering wheel and the pedals and the chair that's moving, because we were in one of those high cost pneumatic configurations, you're engaged in playing and racing, and that was actually worked really well. And then I did like a walkthrough of some portion of the Ready Player One map, part of a digital recreation of a part of the movie, and it was neat. It looked good, and I didn't have any reservations about the image quality that I was seeing. Again, not a glamorous review that you would put on a box for a product, but I think
not the box
telling
quote.
that. I wouldn't put it on a box quote. This is pretty good, I guess.
It didn't suck.
Yeah.
I wasn't
it's
as
definitely
distracted
better
as I used to be by the screen door effect.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how much it's going to cost. They're going to offer it as a headset only first to consumers that already have Vives, because they are forwards and backwards compatible with the current Lighthouse setup and the controllers and all that type of stuff, which is nice. But if you want the new Lighthouse configurations, which are support up to 4 lighthouses, and you can do much larger spaces. If you want the wireless adapter, those are all going to be kind of later in the summertime release. But I'm glad to see at least a refresh of the PC VR ecosystem. I was worried we would not see any of that at CES, and that Vive would only announce, some mobile powered Snapdragon based freestanding device, which they already have done, but some updated version of that. So now we wait to see if the other major player, the Oculus guys, are going to offer some revised hardware of their own this year, which I hope they do, because I want this to continue on and grow.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by the Ring Video Doorbell. Ring's mission to make neighborhoods safer, and the Ring Video Doorbell lets you see and speak to intruders on your smartphone from anywhere, even share video clips with neighbors using the Ring app. Have you seen this guy? Do you know this guy? Ring's floodlight and spotlight cam let you build a ring of security around your entire property. Seriously, just like Ring's Video Doorbell, the floodlight cam is a motion-activated camera and floodlight that connects to your phone. With high visibility floodlights, HD video, and two-way audio, you can talk at that kid on the lawn, finally, without getting out of your chair. It lets you know the moment anyone steps in your property. See and speak to visitors, even set off an alarm right from your phone. Ha! I got that neighbor's cat, finally. When things go bump in the night, you'll immediately know what it is, because you can see it, because you got a floodlight and a cam. How cool is that? Ring floodlight cams offer the ultimate in home security. Thieves just can't hide with Ring. Monitor every corner of your property with a Ring of Security kit, which includes a Ring Video Doorbell and your choice of either 1, 2, or 3 floodlight cams. Connect your Ring Video Doorbell with your favorite smart locks and hubs for added convenience, monitoring, and security. Stop crime before it happens and help make your neighborhood safer with Ring. Save up to $150 on a Ring of Security kit at ring.com/Twitch. That's ring.com/TWICH. We want to thank Ring for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. Thank you. Man, and Modus Fuse Drive is not an AMD product, but is going to be working with AMD Ryzen. It's like high-end server storage tech, but it's going to be brought to AMD Ryzen desktop processor owners. Is this essentially, something similar to the Optane memory, but dedicated to Ryzen desktops?
It's similar. Yeah, the Fuse Drive software that exists already, like this is something that has existed before. They call it, what's the term they use for it? I forget what it is, but they basically allow you to use a tiered storage structure. So it will actually use some of your system memory. It will use NVMe SSDs, SATA SSDs, standard rotating hard drives, all at the same time. And it will all show up as a single drive to the operating system. And then the software is responsible for moving the applications and data that you access most frequently to the fastest devices, whether that be your local memory for a RAM cache, or the NVMe SSD, or the SATA SSD, or the hard drive, right? So the idea is that the slower, least accessed data goes to the big hard drive, but the fastest stuff, the stuff you need most frequently, is moving to your fastest storage options. It's a really good idea, right? If it all functioned perfectly, you have this idea if you could just have one mass storage device, you as a consumer don't have to worry about managing any of that type of thing, what data is going where and why, and when you should move it. You get smoother system performance, faster load times. You can see those benchmarks there. These are obviously, I don't say obviously, but I'm pretty sure these are against a hard drive, right? Mm-hmm. So opening up applications, Photoshop, game launching, all those types of things can be accelerated through that pretty well. It looks like it's a $20 add-on if you have a Ryzen part. I think it's a really good idea. I just have not tested it or vetted it, and we haven't seen it or really looked at some of the potential pitfalls you have with something like this. Is what do you do if what happens if one of those drives dies? The SATA SSD dies in that set of 3 pieces of hardware. Is it doing enough for data backup? Is it storing everything on the hard drive and then it only copies? It actually is copying things, not moving things. Now, are you limited by, is your total capacity the maximum of the largest device on the array, if you want to call it that? There's a lot of other questions I have on it. AMD obviously has some confidence in what they've seen so far. Otherwise, they wouldn't, be offering it, I hope. And the other cool thing is you can do this after the fact. If you have installed Windows on a regular hard drive and now you buy an NVMe SSD, you can install the NVMe SSD, add it to this array, and suddenly everything starts working. I don't understand the magic behind it quite yet, again, because we haven't looked at it. Right. But that is a significant advantage as well, that you don't have to do it you don't have to plan for it beforehand, like you might have to do with other storage options.
Something to be said for not having to plan ahead. I just want more capacity, I want it faster, and I want it now. All right, we'll keep an eye on the Fuse Drive for Ryzen. You called out in the rundown, have you seen the world's thinnest laptop? And I got to say no, because it was down in the Acer booth, which I did not get to, or maybe it was hidden at Acer. But this is the Acer Swift 7 notebook. Acer claims it's the world's thinnest laptop, and it's 8.98 millimeters thin. That's a little over 1/3 of an inch thick. I like how Ken calls it out. He says, to put that into some context, consider that the Core M-based 12-inch MacBook, which was praised for its thin form factor, comes in at 13.2 millimeters thin at its thickest point. I'll be curious. 7th generation core processor. We don't know if it's going to be a 3.5 watt processor or a 15 watt processor. Ken's hoping that they have integrated a 15 watt processor into the design. I personally would aim for a 3.5 watt part operating somewhere near 100% rather than a crippled 15 watt processor, but I may just be shocked at the performance I've seen in some of the 15 watt 8 core or 4 core 8 thread parts in some testing I've done recently, where it's like, oh, it's a faster processor running 30% slower because you can't deal with the thermals of putting this processor inside of your existing design. Built-in LTE connectivity too, using an Intel XMM modem instead of a Qualcomm modem, which is an interesting choice. I'm sure there was a deal made there. I mean, is this essentially a tablet with a folding keyboard, Surface style?
Not really.
Laptop? Okay.
It's not. Yeah, I mean, it's not a detachable. I don't even think it's a. Is it a 2-in-1? I don't think it's a 2-in-1. Actually, I don't think it yogas itself over. But it's almost comically thin, right?
Yeah.
Like, and they kind of chamfer the edges, so it feels thinner even when you're holding it and looking at it than it does otherwise. It's also not going to have amazing battery life because there is essentially very little no battery in there. Yeah. But in terms of like taking it out of your backpack and showing it to somebody and like just it's going to impress a ton of people. And if you're worried about weight at all, this is going to be nearly unmatched in that space. This was part of Intel's, like they're calling this one of their always connected PCs. Whether or not we understand what the definition of that even is yet is to be debated. But because it has an LTE modem, that's basically what they're going for. Probably means
it has an Intel modem inside of it.
Yeah. This will be a long-standing discussion we'll have to have, but it's impressive to look at nonetheless. And it's not stupid expensive. Where did it say it started at? $1,699 starting. So I mean, it's expensive, but like if you look at Lenovo's X1 Yogas and stuff like that, they're in that same range as well.
Right. And one last thought before we go this week, Asus announced the ROG bezel-free kit. And Scott, I'm right with Scott. He says, so I would love to see this one in action. It's essentially some lenses or prisms that strap in the joints on a trio of monitors. And the idea is that you align the edge of each monitor with the edge of the next one by refracting the light that comes off of them, quote, such that the gaps are skipped. And because this is an optical process, no software is required. Specifies that the angles between the monitors has to be 130 degrees. No pricing, available sometime in the first half of this year. This is either going to look awesome or really goofy. I don't think there's any way in between those two possibilities. But if you've been,
works surprisingly well.
So you saw it.
Yeah. Well, I saw it at the Asus demo area. It works better than I thought it would work. The restriction of kind of like you have to use. So Asus didn't say you have to use the Asus monitors, but they said it has to be thin bezel monitors, and they're going to make a version for 24-inch screens and 27-inch screens. So if your monitors physical attributes don't match that of the Asus displays, then it physically won't fit. Also, the requirement to be at 130 degrees is, it's a pain, but they have to do that. Otherwise, you can't get the lens to work correctly. They have to know what the angle is going to be. It's not perfect, and lines that kind of cross it will have kind of like a refractory difference, like kind of almost like looking through a straw on a glass of water type of thing, but much less visible, I guess, in that regard. I want to get some of these in here and like try them out for a little while and see how it is. It's also something you'll have to remove when you're not gaming, because you don't want to have, the text on your browser or Word document or Excel sheet suddenly stretched or moved or modified in any way. I think that might be problematic. So it was one of those surprise things that we saw that I had, I saw the news release for beforehand. I goes, well, this is not going to be good. And that picture is, it's clearly photoshopped and it's meant to look as good as possible, but it's not too bad off of what it really felt like. So we'll see what this looks like when we get it in our hands.
Another glowing tentative endorsement pending full review at PCPro.com.
Yeah.
You see so many shiny objects. We did a big conversation with Robert Heron on the Tech Thing at CES, basically talking about all the new televisions from LG and Samsung and HTC, and Hisense is back. Not HTC, TCL, Hisense, and Sony. Samsung was doing some closed door demos that indicated that they can hit the sort of color quality that LG is delivering with OLED. LG bumped up performance on the OLEDs. Sony had an insane 10,000 nit demo of what like full spec HDR looks like. Looks like TCL's got some great televisions to back up their $650 bargain 4K TV this year, but in larger sizes. Hisense has a couple of good-looking monitors. That's one worth checking out if you're thinking about buying a TV. And of course, we did a whole bunch of coverage both last week and this week on Tech Thing at TEKTHING, which is where you can find me, and also at avxl.com if you're into home theater and audio, which is the podcast I host with Robert Heron. PCPer.com is the place to find Ryan and Alan and the rest of the PC Per crew doing what they do best, the sweet and subtle science of benchmarking and product reviewing. So some good stuff there. If you've never been, you really should go. You are listening right now to This Week in Computer Hardware, a.k.a. TWiCH. You can find more of our episodes and information on subscribing at twitch.tv/TWICH. With that, I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Schraub.
We'll see you next week on TWiCH.